All right, good afternoon. Our Exploring Energy series topic today is Reaping Energy Benefits in Ag Country. MREA's Exploring Energy series is a monthly virtual presentation on the first Wednesday of every month at noon Mountain Time to explore renewable energy technology, the latest trends in energy development, and connect with experts working on the future of our energy system. We have an archive of presentations, past presentations, including microgrids, vehicle-to-everything integration, more about the Inflation Reduction Act, and more topics available in our archives. So about the presentation today, farms, ranches, and rural businesses can save money and transform their operations with a shift to renewable energy resources and efficiency measures. But getting started is often a challenge. So today we've got USDA-Rural Development Montana office experts, Ladd Barney and Daniel Layton, to hear about how farmers and ranchers are rising to the occasion, using cleaner power sources, and building a thriving small business environment in ag country. We'll focus primarily on Rural Energy for America program loan guarantees and grants, some of the program updates that have recently been implemented at the federal level that affect us today, and explore how we can and how this is all designed to make renewable energy and efficiency solutions more accessible. So at this point, I would like to introduce Ladd Barney. Ladd serves as the Montana Business Cooperatives and Program Director for USDA Rural Development. Prior, he served as the Area Director for Rural Development Missoula and Kalispell offices since back in 2008. Ladd's worked as the Director of Small Business Development at the Kalispell Chamber of Commerce for 5 years, and has a great history committed to continuing good momentum and positioning staff, financial resources, and others to respond to the changes that exist in some of these federal programs, state resources for the business community on a daily basis. I'd also love to introduce Daniel Layton. He currently serves as the Montana Business Cooperative and Program Specialist for USDA Rural Development. He's based out of Bozeman, I believe. Is that right, Daniel? Great. And brings a myriad of prior experiences in financial and risk assessment planning, consulting on high-risk situations in many different capacities, and also focused on community development in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. He's a fifth-generation Bobcat and Montanan, and just about hit all the schools because you were a Carroll College grad, and your undergrad was at U of M, right?
No. Not even funny.
MSU. Uh-oh. We're gonna have problems here. We'll have to have a talk afterwards.
Oh yeah.
But Daniel's committed to rural development energy programs and understanding how to serve underserved areas of Montana, including tribal nations, ag producers, and small businesses. So if any of that is an indication that we are in for a treat with these experts, I sure hope so. And I will pass the baton to Ladd. Thank you all.
All right. Thanks a lot, McKenna. Yes, and I am the U of M grad, so go Grizz. To the chagrin of Daniel, I'm sure. So while Daniel is pulling up our slides, thank you, Daniel. Just a real quick introduction. Thank you very much, McKenna, for hosting us today. Really appreciate the partnership that we've had with Montana Renewable Energy Association for a very long period now. And then I remember not quite a year ago, you and I met for the first time at the Energize Montana conference in Missoula with Missoula Electric Co-op. So it was great meeting you then, and great partnering with you ever since then, and doing the great work that MREA is doing here in Montana. Really appreciate the board that you serve for, and the members that are on today. Really appreciate your guys' work here in Montana. Thank you also for inviting us to participate in the fair next weekend on Saturday the 12th. We were looking forward to our presentation. This is going to be very much a taste of what you will get in our breakout session in the afternoon on the 12th. For those of you who are listening live, really invite you to attend and get into the weeds a lot, and into some application 101 information, tips and tricks that Daniel and I will be able to share at that conference in Billings. Really looking forward to that. And thank you, McKenna, for just inviting us to participate in that event. Looking forward to that. So we're here to talk about the Rural Energy for America program, or as McKenna introduced, REAP. And really excited. REAP is a program that's been around for quite some time. It rolled out officially in 2002. And so it's a program that we know very well, but why we're excited now, especially now today, is because the IRA is pumping a significant amount of funds through that existing legislation. So in addition to there being a lot of funds available to make improvements either on the energy efficiency side or with renewables, what's exciting, I think, about this is that it's an existing program. It's a traditional program. It's a program that doesn't need a whole lot of retrofit on the regulations. We're not building the plane as we're flying it. We have a good plane. We're flying it in all the different places in Montana that we possibly can be. So it's something that we're well versed with here at the team here in Montana. So next slide there, Daniel, please. Just to introduce rural development in general, RD 101, because many of our listeners, many of those that we work with, especially on the business side, also serve in their community in varying capacity. I know Daniel and I both serve on nonprofit boards. Some of you are, serve on the volunteer fire department or with your local schools, with sports programs. And rural development can touch all of those areas. And we call them the ABCs. And we don't want to spend too much time on them, but just know that rural development, Daniel and I are very much involved in the for-profit kind of business and industry efforts here as far as economic development goes in Montana. But just know that we have colleagues and a team across Montana that also work on the housing crisis that we're experiencing, working with communities on single and multifamily housing efforts in rural communities here in Montana. And then part of that certainly we can't do anything if we don't have infrastructure in place to support those homes and those jobs. So our community programs with healthcare efforts and fire department efforts, essential community facilities, social services, as well as just infrastructure, water and sewer projects, broadband projects. Rural development touches all of those different areas, in addition to the business programs that Daniel and I operate within. So we're going to focus on the Rural Energy for America program today. But on the business side, we also get involved with economic development. We work very closely with revolving loan fund partners across Montana. In every area of Montana, we've got a partner that can provide access to capital, either with loans or grants or loan guarantees. So we would invite you to talk to us and talk to any of those partners on getting good business development assistance and planning going forward and tapping into those resources that are available to the business community. So next slide. Real quick introduction to the team. I'll introduce Daniel here, take the next few slides in presenting the REAP program. But we're spread out all across Montana. We've got a specialist in Kalispell and in Missoula, in Great Falls, and in Billings, and in Bozeman, of course. And then we've got a couple of remote employees as well. We've got Shandy out in Northeast Montana, out in Scobie. We've got Marley Johnston now, just got married, who also works at remote, working specifically in ag production or ag producers for all of our programs on the business side. And then Barb and I work in the Bozeman office, just supporting all of those field specialists and all of the different programs that we deliver. And then newest member of the team is Daniel Layton. Daniel has been brought on with the help of funds from the IRA to help deliver our energy programs more predominantly across the map here in Montana. There's areas in eastern Montana that we need to serve better. And there's some really hard areas to serve in eastern Montana. There's not a lot of people there. There's not a lot of businesses there. But I think there's a lot of opportunity there that Daniel is taking on to help build vendor capacity with energy vendors, lending partners, as well as economic developers. So without further ado, happy to have Daniel on board. Thank you, Daniel, for taking the next few slides here. We'll go through the REAP program. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Lad. Appreciate the introduction. So Rural Energy for America program, I might refer to REAP quite a bit here. We love our acronyms at USDA. Basically the program, as Lad got into a little bit, our grants and guarantees for renewable energy system installations and also energy efficiency improvements. And we focus on agricultural and small businesses. The grants themselves can cover up to 50% of total eligible project costs. There is a historical 25% pre the Inflation Reduction Act, and there is always a chance that that 50% may go down, especially they're going to be re-reviewing here at the new fiscal year, October 1st. So get them while they're hot. But there's always a chance that funding can be reduced on that, but it is a strong program, as Lad said, and we don't see it going away anytime soon. The guarantees, we will basically cover up to 80%, and I'll go into that a little bit later, but they can cover up to 80% of a loan, and we work directly through the lender. And regardless of whether it's a combined grant and loan, or just a loan, or just a grant, there's always going to be at least a 25% amount where the applicant will have to come up from another source. So that will either be, a private loan from, their own personal capital. It can also come from, a state grant or some other funding source other than federal. The projects that are eligible, Montana, we pretty much do a lot of solar, and I saw a lot of solar vendors on this call, which is great. And we have worked with quite a few of you, and you know a lot about the technical assistance side of this, but we do also do some small hydro projects. We've done wind projects. We are really interested in getting into your geothermal. There's a lot of potential there. Haven't really done any anaerobic digesters. Biomass is also an upcoming technology that we are interested in, but solar is the big one in Montana, it seems like. And then with energy efficiency, these are kind of mainstream ideas that I'm really interested in, and Lad is as well. Looking at the small businesses in rural Montana, you walk down a main street of, Scobie, Montana, or Twin Bridges, and you look at these small businesses, for example, and how many of those small businesses have been sitting there for 50 years and, not redone their insulation, or for examples like gas stations where all of the people, the locals in the town, that's their meeting spot. Or your grocery stores, going in and replacing the coolers, the refrigerators, freezers, lighting. All of that can really make a big difference as far as creating sustainability for those businesses, as well as agricultural producers in this regard. So we're really excited about the opportunity to kind of do some of these smaller projects in the areas that, we really haven't had much grasp on with this program, that we see a lot of potential. The eligible entities for a small business, private businesses, for-profit, cooperatives, and electric utilities, tribal corporations, tribal business entity. Nonprofits are typically not eligible. There are minor exceptions, but those are definitely things to talk directly to us about if going through the application process. The rural area in definition for this particular program with REAP is a community of less or equal to 50,000. For agricultural producers, we're looking at 50% or more of their gross income coming from agricultural operations. So this can be in a rural or non-rural areas, as long as 50% of their gross income is coming from agricultural operations. The eligible project costs, ineligible project costs, I think Lad will get into this a little bit more, and kind of some examples of where things can fit. But there is a significant, as you can see, need for consultation with an energy coordinator with USDA, with our state office, just to verify kind of your project, the technical merit, just mostly making sure that before you break any ground, you're discussing the project with us, and getting a full application in. Those are the biggest key tips that I can give you. And we can kind of walk through and see, you know, what would be eligible for project costs. The grant itself, we're looking at a minimum project cost, so not grant, but project cost of $10,000. And we actually did increase with the IRA funds. We increased it from 500,000 to $1 million maximum grant. So that's a tremendous benefit in a lot of regards for some of these larger solar arrays, community solar arrays, your hydroelectric projects. And the energy efficiency, we're looking at a minimum project cost of $6,000 and a maximum grant request of $500,000. So that also doubled basically with the Inflation Reduction Act. A little bit about our guaranteed loan program, which is really great. We're really encouraging this as a viable option, especially with lenders and some of our larger projects that could use the extra capital. We actually guarantee up to 80% and work directly through the lender. So it's obviously something that a lender will have to approve as a loan. However, these guarantees typically will work in a client's favor to get these larger loans. They're basically protecting the lender and protecting the client as well. So the opportunity as well to increase the scope of the project, we have up to 25 million that we can loan and guarantee. That is, of course, up to the lender to see what they are willing to do. And our loan can actually be stacked with some of our other programs, like Lad mentioned, the business and industry guarantees can also be stacked. So it can be a fairly large loan depending on eligibility with the lender. And we do have amortizations of up to 40 years. Our interest rates and, you know, your fees, the terms typically are pretty advantageous, especially when looking at a SBA loan in comparison. And, you know, you got your property tax benefits, you got your job creation and economic development. So there is a great advantage to adding these into the mix. So we're going to go into a little bit more on what makes a successful REAP application. This is kind of the top 10 that I kind of put together, talking with our team and seeing what struggles they have had. And the primary, you know, ones within this top 10 are, you know, don't incur any cost prior to notice from our rural development office that the application is complete. Even after submittal, make sure that you get the notice that you have completed the application in full. And always be in communication with us is a key tidbit of advice that will help you along the way. This program is typically, you know, a little bit more simplified than some of our other programs to apply for, but we need to assure that we have all the proper documentation, especially in a little bit more of the complex projects. The other main things within this top 10 are understanding what you want to do, understanding the technical merit, understanding the system that you want to use or the improvements you want to make, and know that you would have to, can only do one at a time. So you can't necessarily do a solar array with wind at the same time. Those would technically be two separate applications. There are some additional eligible additions to that we would have to work through as a team. And that's what I recommend, your teamwork. But in addition to those, before that application is submitted, make sure you're eligible applicant, as we looked at before, making sure that project is eligible. You know, we're looking small business agriculture. And a huge one that we're looking at right now is the UEI and SAM enrollment. I know a lot of you vendors out there are probably aware of this, but the applicant cannot receive any funds, federal funds, without being SAM certified. And this is something that we are working on to get technical assistance on with sub applicants, because this is oftentimes an area where applicants will drop off the map, and we don't want that to happen. We're trying to get this done early and be efficient with it, because it can take some time, especially if there's confusion along the process. So the other main one that I will point out, number 8, always make sure that you follow the guidelines. We have a checklist available to you to make sure all the documentation is completed and turned in at the initial application filing. That really helps speed along the way for you know, our scoring system and verifying eligibility. And the other, number 10, please be open to providing project and process feedback. We thrive on that, and we're trying to make things more efficient, more effective. We need your feedback on this. We've really excelled with this project in Montana, but you can always get better, right? So without further ado, I want to pass it over to Ladd here. He's gonna jump into a little bit more of the meat and bones of this project here.
All right, thanks again there, Daniel. So McKenna, how are we doing on time? We're
We're in good shape. Yeah, I
in
think
good shape. Okay, if we run long, I like to be long-winded, so feel free to give me the hook when you need to. Daniel or McKenna, if you guys are monitoring the chat for questions, feel free to jump in, interrupt me too as well. So yeah, so what Daniel talked about as far as the tips and tricks, that is going to be the meat of our presentation at the MREA fair. And really, we won't have the chance to do it today, but during that fair, we want to pull up some of the application materials and actually walk through some of the categories that we focus on. We want to make sure don't get missed. That, you know, just as value in going through them in those different areas as to, and give you kind of a behind the scenes look of what I and Daniel and the rest of my team look at when crunching through the technical information and the financial information for the particular application. So the rest of our time today, we just want to introduce some projects and maybe talk a little bit about through some sticky wickets and tie in a little bit of those tips and tricks. And then more importantly, just invite follow-up conversation if any of those scenarios kind of apply to you as ag producers. We wanted to hone in and focus on that. So this is not an ag production project, but wanted to introduce this as a type of project that we can do. So it's community solar projects, and most of the community solar projects that are done through electric co-op here in Montana, we've had some role in through the REAP program. The one that you see right here is Fergus Electric. And that was a $310,000 project, a rather sizable grant for $77,000. And then the co-op and their members came up with $232,000 separately. There's been 2 phases of Fergus Electric community solar project that we've done. We've done community solar project at Beartooth Electric. We've done 2 community solar projects with Ravalli Electric. We've done 3 community solar projects with Missoula Electric. The reason why we're excited, you know, those fit really well is because it's a way for Montana citizens to participate in solar and renewable energy systems without necessarily owning a home or having a south-facing roof. Most of the business models that are covered under the community solar projects, allow for the purchase of the panel or the benefit of the panel. And that might be a way for folks to be able to contribute to and control their own energy destiny without necessarily having, like I said, that south-facing roof or own the home or own the business to be able to control what happens with that property. So excited to introduce this as a potential thing to think about. You might not be able to be an applicant or a specific recipient of USDA-Rural Energy funds, but maybe you can indirectly through working with your local electric co-op. Next slide, please. Daniel. Oh, there we go. So Daniel introduced that we would like to do more hydro projects. And this is an example of a hydro project that we participate in outside of the Great Falls area. Turnbull Hydro, and you can see some just large numbers here. So the reason why we're showing this project is just to show most of what we do with our REAP grant projects is your smaller projects, your $200,000 total project costs or less projects. I would say that's probably 90% of the projects that we do are with those smaller, quote unquote, smaller projects. But don't forget that we can do some really very massive and very large projects. This one just happened to be $11.5 million with a $500,000 REAP grant using an $8 million guarantee loan with a modest amount compared to the size of the project, equity funds from the project itself. That's a guarantee loan. As large as it is, 8 million is pretty big in our world anyway. But that was a loan that got paid off within 5 years of being closed on. So that was an indication of how quickly that return on investment happened with that particular hydro project. We've also done some smaller hydro projects, right? So irrigation projects that where you're putting a small turbine into an irrigation ditch and driving energy off of that. We've worked on those types of projects. So we don't do very many of them, but for those of you who do have that appetite, we'd like to work with you and consider that as something to do under the renewable side. So next question or slide. All right, so Big Sandy solar powered water pump. Oftentimes what we see with ag producers, and we're going to talk a little bit about sticky wickets, is on the environmental side. Daniel kind of touched on it in his tips and tricks. Most of what we see with our projects, whether it's ag producer or whether it's rural small business, is folks that are making energy efficiency improvements within their business, or if they're getting into the renewable side, they're putting solar panels up on their roof, or it's near, adjacent to a building. And in those scenarios, those projects from an environmental due diligence standpoint are really pretty easy. They're pretty simple. Staff can work through and work with the applicant very quickly on mitigating any environmental issues with projects like that. Where we get into a little bit of more expense and delay on projects, especially as it relates to ag producers, is when they're breaking new ground, wanting to install a ground mount, maybe out in the field, kind of power a water pump or power a pivot. We do work on those projects. We do a handful of those projects every year. But because they're digging new ground, pristine ground, there's a little bit more due diligence on any cultural aspects or environmental aspects of that new ground that hasn't been already mitigated. So we look for those projects that are done on previously disturbed ground. I don't want to talk you out of doing a solar system powering a pivot, but just be aware that there's more time to go through the NEPA, the National Environmental Protection Act requirements that we have to adhere to using federal funds for that project. So we have good guidance that we can walk you through what that process is as far as an environmental report goes. But it's an additional step from the other requirements of our application that we have. So this project was, a pretty typical project as far as the size goes and the amount of the grant for that particular case. But the reason why we included it in this slide is just to be able to talk through on the environmental piece and just be prepared for that if that's something that you want to do. So this is another exciting project that we did in Martinsdale, an energy efficiency project, going from a diesel generator to an electric. There's $232,000 in total project costs. The REAP grant that was available at that time was $54,506. A lot of what you're noticing with these slides is that they're nowhere close to 50%. And that's because the IRA funds are just now hitting the street. They're just now rolling out for those 50% grant funded projects. A year from now, when we're doing these slides, we expect those project costs to be shared by the USDA for more than what they're showing right now. But right now, most of these are showing about 25%, which is what the program traditionally provided through the Farm Bill going back to 2002. So next slide. All right, and I think this is the last one, Daniel. This is Apple Barrel fruit stand in Kalispell. This was your typical, I think, Main Street business that can use the program. It was an energy efficiency project that helped do a retrofit of their existing retail space. So they did some improvements with the windows and insulation, including the doors part of that. And then they also did a replacement of their walk-in freezer. And so really renovated that part of the retail space. But we also worked with a local economic developer for some low interest loan funds, be able to make some other improvements within that piece that didn't qualify for the energy side, some non-energy related piece parts of the project. So one of the aspects of our partners is that they're financial consultants just like we are. They're economic developers. They can help put a project together financially. And that's what they do. That's why they're there. They're there to help with some of the application materials, but also to work through a sources and uses of funds, financial, startup costs sheet, and how that flows through with the rest of your financials to essentially lay out and make sure that this makes sense to you financially. And this Apple Barrel project is a good example of that. They worked with the economic developer to to go through all of the different options as far as what the financing resources that were available. REAP was a piece of that. Their revolving loan fund was a piece of that. And then a local lender was also a piece of that total project cost coming together, which is quite often what we see, right? Is either a lender providing some financial resources to make projects happen. And then and then you've got the REAP grant that contributes the remainder. So exciting project to work on. So next slide. All right, so how to apply, really just Google USDA-Rural Development. Even better, you can access this through McKenna's website. The MREA website has a link to this, which will take you directly there. And you get the contacts from the map at the beginning of the presentation. We could love to give you those links and those application materials and walk you through and address any questions that you or your customers might have. For those vendors that are on the line, we're really excited to have you. Really value your partnership, especially on the technical side, and need you in order to be successful here in Montana. So look forward to keeping in touch with everybody on the call today, and then hope to see you again on Sunday. All right. So IRA, as far as we know, with IRA, we've changed the application cycle. Sorry, I forgot about this slide, McKenna, but it always used to be where the REAP program was an annual cycle, and to better disperse the IRA funds, they've rolled them out into quarterly cycles. So we just wrapped up the first quarterly cycle in June. The next one is in September 30th, and then there'll be 4 more after that, as long as we've got the funds to do so. And then depending on what happens in September of 2024, might be future cycles, and lots yet to be determined on the Farm Bill side. So, all right, and then a bunch of resources available. McKenna, you're going to make this presentation available, so these hot links will take you everywhere you want to go, as far as anything on the renewable side. But if there's others questions that you have, then we're here to serve. We'd love to talk through any questions or project details that you have. So, all right, so I was monitoring the chat a little bit earlier for questions. I don't know if you want to go back to those and repeat those.
Yeah, I think it would
or
be
any
worth
others?
repeating, Lad. Sounds great. And thank you so much for the presentation. I think that the case studies showing that about a $13,000 project to an $8 million project are all possible, and experiencing that range, I think, is a powerful thing to see in real time. So thank you for giving us the case studies. Most of the questions at the beginning of the call focused on eligibility, and we did get a question from Lori Byron about community health centers that typically are nonprofit. I thought that maybe some community nonprofit or community health centers are for-profit entities, but Lori, if you want to re-ask the question, that'd be great.
Put you on the spot there, Lori.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, they can't afford to be for-profit. All the community centers are EOs, which makes them eligible for grants. So they would not be eligible for this.
That's correct. Usually what we see on the nonprofit side is a 503c or 501c3 structure, or a 501c6, and neither of those organization structures are eligible under the REAP program. As I mentioned in the chat, and at the beginning when we were introducing the RD 101 programs, some of our community facility loans and grants can be used for nonprofits that are providing a essential community service within rural communities. So that's not what Daniel and I do on the community facility side, but we've got good team members on that side that would work with community health centers and other types of organizations through their.
Can one of you put? Thanks. Can one of you put contact for them in the chat?
You bet. Absolutely.
And if somebody works out of their home, like technically has a small business and they, write expenses and stuff, can they qualify?
Maybe. One of the aspects, thanks, that's a great question. One of the aspects of this program is that it cannot be used for residential energy use. It absolutely cannot. It's a hard no, or a hard sideboard there. So how does that apply to ag producers, right? Most farmers and ranchers, their business and their home is one and the same. So we can work with projects where we ask the energy vendor or the applicant through the energy technical review to include information about what the business is using, carving out a pro rata share for what the residence is using. And if we can see that through objective or independent information, utility bills, or an engineer or the energy vendor a lot of times themselves has that background to be able to demonstrate that in the application, then we can do that project. We have to pro rata the grant to that cost of the business project. So there might be a part of that project that is powering the residents that we can't include as project costs as eligible, but we could do potentially the others. So we want to be flexible to be able to accommodate that, especially for farmers and ranchers, because that's a very typical scenario. But some businesses, we have a really hard time being able to do that, or it's too expensive. Like for bed and breakfasts, for example, that we have found is not a project that we'd really do with this energy program. It's just too difficult to carve out the residence piece.
There was another question, just Lad, because you mentioned the technical review portion, and you also mentioned a sticky wicket, as you called it, with the ground mount system. The case study that you gave, I think, was over in Big Sandy. But to clarify, the NEPA, and in the chat it was asked about MEPA review, but because this is federal funding, that would be NEPA with an N. Just clarifying that a full NEPA review process would be required for a small business landowner on private property if they're using REAP funds.
It is. I understand that it's a small business and it's for profit and it's private land. But NEPA governs the distribution of our federal funds. And so even though it's a small, for profit, private business, we have to adhere to NEPA. So the answer to that is NEPA, the National Environmental Protection Act.
We have another question here from Karen. Sounds like rooftop solar for the City of Whitefish Library would not qualify. And
it would not.
It's like no. Could you tell us more about the rural electric cooperative partnerships? You mentioned the community solar projects. Like, could someone who is in rural electric co-op territory work in partnership with their co-op to get a project completed? And have you seen that in the past?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. We work very closely with rural electric co-ops, and oftentimes one of the first suggestions when we were talking to applicants is, have you talked to your co-op? Do they know you want to do this? Whether it's energy efficiency or renewable energy, talking to them about how it applies to your situation is always a good first call. On the renewable side, they'll want to talk to you about kind of net metering and how that might apply for your particular situation. Is the size fit with their standards? Here's the paperwork to enter into a net metering agreement, and invite any questions you might have on that. And we do require, as part of our funds disbursement stage, that connection with the electric co-op. If there's a net metering scenario involved, we need to see that that's executed and in place before we can disperse the funds. We talked a little bit about the partnership on the community solar side and the benefits of that the REAP program allows. But we also want to make sure that we work very closely with the electric co-ops or Northwestern Energy in rural communities to make sure that it's a really good fit for what the business wants to use there.
Yeah, and just to make a comment from the MREA perspective, I'm always thinking about capital stacks. So REAP is serving a certain audience of for-profit and rural entities that other grants don't. I'm thinking of the USB customer-funded Northwestern Energy Universal Systems Benefits Program, which is a grant of around, I think it's up to $40,000 for renewable energy, but serving nonprofits and government entities. So perhaps that's the type of eligibility that the Whitefish Library might be able to pursue as a nonprofit or government.
Great.
Any other questions from the audience? You can put it in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask questions of Lad and Daniel, I welcome that as well.
When you talked about the hydro project Fairfield, did you say irrigation canals?
I'm having a hard time hearing you there, Lori.
Yeah, sorry, Lori, but I think I got it. You were just asking about irrigation canals.
The Fairfield project, was that irrigation canals?
I don't think
Where was
so.
the hydro? Oh, okay.
The hydro that we worked on there in Turnbull was the large project. But we've done
Oh, I'm
some
sorry.
up,
Okay.
yeah, we've done some up in Glacier County. I worked on one that was out in Lincoln County. And we're looking at some of those this application cycle over in eastern Montana. So we don't do very many of them, but we'd like to do more.
Yeah, and I'll add to that as well, Lad. I mean, that the small hydro projects with the technology that's coming out right now, there's a huge potential.
Am I frozen up there?
We're all struggling with internet today. Yeah, we lost Daniel, but we'll welcome. Oh, we brought him back.
Oh, did you hear what I said?
Why don't you give it to us one more time?
So as Lad was saying, we love the opportunity for small hydro. We welcome that. It's certainly a great opportunity for agriculture. And it is a large energy producer, and there is a potential with the new technology that's coming out right now to certainly make it a very much smaller scale than the $11 million project you saw. So the technology is there. We're very interested in seeing where that goes.
Lad and Daniel, and then I'll come up with my own question. If you had to give an applicant 3 words to the wise, or like 3 things to consider, beyond the first pass of am I eligible and do my project upgrades or do what I have planned qualify for REAP, what would be your 3 words to the wise in terms of the application process and making sure what you submit in your application is successful?
Well, I'll throw out 3 from a program director standpoint, and then the specialist may contradict me. But from a program director standpoint, patience and communication is absolutely critical. Patience in just being flexible with what you're seeing with federal paperwork side. It is a federal program, but whether it's federal, or whether it's state, or whether it's private, paperwork just will never cease to surprise you. You know, why am I having to provide this particular certification document or this particular information? Just don't be. I don't have an answer to all those whys, but what I would recommend is just be flexible with it. Know that's coming, and don't be afraid to ask for help. Right? Don't feel like you have to do it on your own. There's a lot of assistance out there through MREA, through economic developers, through the energy vendors that you're working with. They have that information. Don't feel like you have to control or possess all of the information yourself in order to submit a quality application. You can draw on those knowledge and that brain damage that has come before you. The other piece is, I think, specific to the Rural Energy for America program, is that we incentivize and reward projects that make financial sense. So just know that that's something that we're looking at as part of our processing and our scoring process. Is this being done for good business financial reasons? We measure return on investment and simple payback. We need to capture that information, and then we'll have a conversation with you, with the business owner, and say, this doesn't, look like it's going to pay off for 50 years. Are you sure you want to do this? And there can be very good answers to those questions, right? I need redundancy because I have brownouts in my area, or I want to contribute to, the green economy and contribute to the environment. It means more to me than the financial side. All those are fantastic answers to the question. But just know that that's something that we're looking at as well. We want to do smart business projects. Daniel, you got any other tidbits? Sam and UEI,
Yeah.
of course.
Yeah, well, and on top of that, you touched on it a little bit, even though you went past your 3 words, but I would say, communicate with partners, that means RD, that means McKenna with MREA, communicate with your vendors. A lot of these vendors are making some serious gains on their portfolios, by advertising this grant. It's a good way to get people in a foot in the door, knowing that this is an opportunity, not guaranteed, but an opportunity. But a lot of them are knowledgeable on technical assistance with this. But communicate with partners, contact us. If you're interested in an application, as Lad said, if this doesn't look right for you, or if you're not eligible, we may direct you to a program that's more applicable or more of an advantage to you. So that's what we're here for. We want to make sure this makes sense for you and to help you along the way. And test your knowledge, see what you're really getting into. So and try to find something that works. So
Absolutely. I think that that's an excellent way to close out the presentation, and having Lad and Daniel here on this phone call is indicative of the fact that they want you to be successful. So if you're looking at an application through REAP, if you're just getting started and can't navigate the process yourself or struggling, that's why we're here. That's why MREA is here. And that's why USDA-Rural development staff are here to guide you through that process too, and make sure what you put together is something that can work.